My husband threw a cake in my face because I refused to pay the bill at a fancy restaurant. But what happened before that was even more surprising. Subscribe to the channel and write in the comments where you're watching us from. I met Lucas at a gallery full of expensive art and people who smiled with their teeth, but not their eyes. I wasn't there to enjoy myself. I was there because my mother loved being seen, and my father loved reminding people who we were. I wore a black dress that cost more than my first car. Everyone said I looked stunning. I felt invisible. Then I saw him, Lucas. Not because he was loud or flashy. He stood still, looking at a painting of a broken-down building like it meant something. He wasn't trying to be noticed, which is probably why I noticed him. He walked over, calm like he belonged there, and said, "Maya Sinclair, hard to miss." I almost rolled my eyes. Should I say thank you or call security? He smiled. Depends. Are you planning to run away? We talked. It started with the art, then drifted to cities, buildings, how the world is built and broken. He said he was an architect. I told him I worked in finance, though I could tell he didn't really care about the money part. He asked what I'd build if I could. No one had asked me something like that before. Not even me. He wasn't impressed by my last name. That was rare. Most people either acted nervous or tried to act richer. He didn't care. I liked that. More than I should have. When the night ended, he said, "You're not what I expected." "You don't even know me," I said. "Not yet," he smiled. I should have known. People like Lucas don't walk into your life without a reason. But in that moment, I felt seen. And that was all it took. That night was the first step. Everything seemed perfect back then. Charming, funny, thoughtful. The kind of man who made you feel like you were the only person in the room. And later, he'd make sure that's exactly what I was, alone in a room, with no one left to call. But I didn't know that yet. I only knew that he made me laugh when I felt bored, and that he looked at art like it could heal something. So when he asked me to dinner a week later, I said yes. That was the beginning. The cake in the face. That came much later. Lucas became part of my everyday life so quickly, it barely felt like a choice. At first, I told myself it was because we fit well, like two people who just got each other. He remembered what kind of tea I liked, what side of the bed I slept on, even the way I hated sudden noises. But gradually, he began speaking for both of us. When we were invited to things, he answered without asking. He started saying we when he meant I. I noticed, but I didn't push back. It felt easier not to. He had a way of making moments feel cinematic. Surprise dinners, long walks under city lights, handwritten notes left by my laptop. The attention was flattering. Overwhelming sometimes, but flattering. He called it love. I believed him. It wasn't until Chloe raised an eyebrow that I realized how tightly he'd wrapped himself into my routine. She never said anything cruel, just asked questions I hadn't thought to ask. Like why he always seemed to be around, or why I stopped coming to weekend hangouts unless he was invited too. Her words didn't sit well with me, mostly because they echoed thoughts I'd tried to ignore. Still, I kept making excuses. That he was just thoughtful. That maybe I was just too used to distance. My past relationships were full of space. Lucas was the opposite of that. It felt different, and I wanted different. But sometimes different doesn't mean better. There was this dinner one night, not with my whole family, just my dad. We met at a quiet restaurant downtown. Lucas smiled through most of it, played the part. My father kept things polite but firm, steering the conversation into subjects like future plans and financial management. Lucas answered quickly, but something in his tone shifted. His words were smooth, but his posture was stiff. After we left, he didn't say much. We sat in the car in silence until he finally asked, "Does he always test your boyfriends like that?" "He asks questions," I said. "It's not personal." Lucas didn't argue, but he didn't forget it either. Later that week, I found him looking through my phone, not snooping, just reading old texts like he had a right to. When I asked what he was doing, he smiled and said, "Just curious what your life looked like before me." That should have felt strange, but I let it go. By spring, we were talking about marriage. Or rather, he spoke about it like a plan already made. I didn't object. I kept telling myself this was what security looked like. Someone who wanted to build a life together, someone decisive. When he proposed, I said yes. Not because I was swept away by the romance of it all, but because it felt like the next step in something I'd already started. The morning of the wedding, I caught a glimpse of myself in the mirror and for a second, didn't recognize the woman looking back. Everything was perfect. My dress, the venue, the ring. And yet something inside me was still. Not cold, not afraid. Just still. I didn't question it out loud. Not then. The Sinclair estate had never looked more polished. Every tree on the grounds had been trimmed, every light positioned to create just the right glow. I had spent weeks with planners making sure everything was flawless. Floral arches, soft jazz, champagne served in crystal. It was my version of control, not to impress, but to feel calm, safe. The world could be unpredictable, but this day would go exactly as planned. Lucas didn't seem to care about any of that. Not really. When I showed him fabric swatches for the table linens, he said, "Just pick the least boring one." When we reviewed the seating chart, he only scanned it to check which names would matter long term. He added guests without telling me, old clients, potential investors, people I'd never met. "It's smart to keep these people close," he said. "They remember things like this." I told him it wasn't a business event. He laughed and kissed my forehead. "You worry too much." The more I tried to talk through details, the more he brushed them off or took them over. Once, when I asked him to stick to the guest list we'd agreed on, he turned to me and said, "You get kind of intense when things don't go your way." It was the first time I heard that edge in his voice. He didn't shout. He didn't raise a hand. Just delivered the line like a diagnosis. I didn't respond, just nodded and let it sit somewhere behind my ribs. On the day itself, I moved through the rooms like I was walking inside a dream I'd designed. Everyone was smiling, dressed in light colors. My mother looked proud. My father looked satisfied. I stood under an arch of orchids and said vows I barely remembered afterward. Lucas's speech was perfect, witty, warm, just the right amount of emotional. People clapped, some even teared up. I held his hand and smiled for the cameras, thinking maybe I was wrong to worry. Later that evening, when the dancing started and the crowd thinned toward the bar, I stepped away for a moment. I found Lucas near the terrace, glass in hand, talking to a small group of men in suits. His tone had changed. Gone was the groom. In his place was the salesman, polished, eager, just a bit smug. "I've got 3 projects in the pipeline," he was saying. "Private clients mostly, but I'm open to partners. Tonight's been a great opportunity to make connections." They laughed. Someone handed him a card. He slipped it smoothly into his pocket. I didn't interrupt. I just watched from the shadows of the hallway, realizing this wasn't his wedding. It was his pitch. He didn't even notice I was standing there. We went to Paris because Lucas said it was where people fall in love again. He booked it before I could even suggest anywhere else. Said it was a surprise, that I deserved magic. I didn't argue. Paris sounded perfect. Every movie, every story, every photo made it look like the city where things begin. Our hotel had a balcony with a view of the Eiffel Tower, and every night the lights blinked like they were cheering for us. He ordered fresh croissants to the room, took photos of me sipping espresso, called me his muse more than once. It was the kind of trip people post about, flawless, romantic, planned down to the last second. And yet, by the 3rd day, I felt like I was walking more carefully. The first time was over dinner. I wore a black dress, satin-fitted, something I'd worn before and always loved. But when I stepped out, Lucas just looked at me for a beat too long. "Don't you think it's a little much?" he said, tilting his head. "I mean, it might draw the wrong kind of attention." He smiled when he said it, like it was a joke. I laughed along, but I went back and changed into something softer. He kissed my cheek when I returned and said, "You look perfect." The second time, we were at a bookstall by the river. An older French man complimented my accent when I tried to ask for directions. Lucas didn't say anything then, but later, while we walked, he said, "You're a little too friendly sometime. People get the wrong idea." Again, it was said lightly. Again, I nodded and made a note. Soon, I stopped wearing heels unless he picked them. I asked him before ordering wine. I avoided chatting too long with strangers, even waiters, just in case. It wasn't that he told me not to. He never used those words. It was how he looked when I did. How he went quiet for a little too long. How he suddenly got tired, or not in the mood to go out afterward. He still bought me flowers, still held my hand, still said, "You're everything to me." But I started to feel like everything I did had to pass some invisible line, something only he could see. If I crossed it, even by accident, he wouldn't shout. He'd just pull away slightly, not angry, just disappointed. And I kept trying not to disappoint him. Paris was still beautiful. The river still glittered at night. The food was still perfect. But something in me began to quiet. Not out of fear, but out of habit. It felt easier to shrink a little than risk him pulling away again. Easier to change the dress than ask why he didn't like it. I didn't say anything out loud. Not yet. But I packed differently when we left. Coming back home felt quieter than I expected. Paris had been full of movement. Music in the streets, color, noise, charm. Here, everything was still. Our apartment looked untouched, as if we had stepped out of time. The mail was piled up. The plants were dry. But Lucas seemed instantly relaxed. He kicked off his shoes, threw his jacket on the couch, and smiled like he was exactly where he belonged. I unpacked slowly. Everything smelled like hotel soap and croissants. I found the little notebook I'd filled during the trip. Ideas I'd scribbled between flights and dinners, notes for a new investment project I'd been dreaming up for months. Something in me had reignited during Paris. Something creative, independent, sharp. I waited until we'd settled in, then brought it up over dinner. "So, I've been thinking," I said, setting the notebook down gently between us. "I want to launch something. Sustainable investing, but with a focus on community-led initiative. Real impact, slow growth, but clean, transparent. He looked up from his plate, expression unreadable. That sounds complicated. I blinked. It is, but... Maya, he set down his fork. You don't have to work. We're good. Like really good. You don't need to stress yourself trying to fix the world. I'm not trying to fix the world, I said, quieter now. This matters to me. He smiled like I'd said something cute. Sure. I just don't want to see you burn yourself out for some passion project. That word, passion project, landed heavy. I didn't argue. I just tucked the notebook away. He didn't ask about it again. The next week, he brought home new furniture. Not just a chair or a lamp, whole pieces. A massive oak table. A leather sofa I'd never seen before. He waved off the price when I asked. Discounted. Through a client. Then came the upgraded sound system. The imported rugs. The weekend getaway to Napa booked without checking my calendar. When I looked at our joint account, something felt off. Balances dipped faster than usual. Statements showed transfers I didn't recognize. I asked him about one, the largest one. That, he said, barely looking up. Short-term fund. High yield. It's safe. You'll thank me later. You moved 10,000 without asking. He sighed. Maya, I told you, you don't have to worry about this stuff. I've got it under control. But I was worried. I'd always tracked my own finances. Carefully. Intentionally. Now, numbers weren't lining up. Names on transactions weren't familiar. Still, every time I asked, he offered calm explanations. Called it growth. Strategy. Said things like long game and trust me. And for a while I did. Until I started noticing he had passwords I hadn't shared. Until I realized some of the new furniture was billed to my name. Until I called the bank to double-check a temporary hold he said they'd placed, and found out there was no such thing. I didn't say anything right away. Not because I didn't want to. Because I needed time to figure out how. He still brought me flowers. Still kissed me goodnight. But I started keeping copies of everything. Just in case. The excuses started small. Lucas would say he was too tired to go to dinner with my parents, or that he had a last-minute meeting when I planned to see Chloe. At first, I didn't think much of it. Schedules shift, people get overwhelmed. But then it kept happening, again and again. Always something. Always a reason to stay home. To stay just the two of us. When I offered to go alone, he'd pause for a second too long. You sure that's a good idea? He'd ask. Your dad barely hides how he feels about me. And your mom, well, she doesn't exactly make me feel welcome. He wasn't angry, just tired. Worn down. Why put myself through that? And so I stayed home. Again. Soon, I noticed how often he called when I was out. If I was with Chloe for coffee, my phone buzzed every 20 minutes. Just checking in. Just wondering when I'd be back. If I took too long, the question started. Who was there? Did anyone say anything weird? Was I okay? I started answering faster. Started watching the time. Then came the comments about Chloe. Soft at first, harmless seeming. I just don't get why she's still single, he said one. She's so intense. Always in everyone's business. I laughed it off. But after that, I saw her less. Not because I didn't want to, but because I didn't want to explain it. She noticed. Of course she did. You disappear, she said one day over lunch. You ghost texts. You cancel last minute. What's going on? I smiled too quickly. Just work stress. She didn't buy it, but she didn't push. Work was the one place I still felt like myself, at least for a while. I was sharp, quick, direct. People respected that. Or they used to. Lucas started making comments after meetings we'd both attended. You don't have to come off so harsh, he said. You're smarter than that. Tone can make all the difference. I blinked. What do you mean? Just saying. Sometimes being too direct makes people uncomfortable. Makes you seem aggressive. I wasn't sure which stung more, his words or the way he said them, like a gentle tip from someone who knew better. It made me question things I'd never questioned before. I started editing my emails more carefully, softening my voice during calls, apologizing before making points. When I shared a strong opinion during a pitch, he raised an eyebrow. Not disapproving, just amused, like I'd done something mildly embarrassing. Later that night, he said, I liked you better when you didn't care what people thought. I didn't answer. I didn't know what to say. Slowly, the world around me got smaller. Fewer dinners, fewer texts, fewer visits. My thoughts, too, began shrinking. Everything filtered through the same quiet question I never said aloud. Is this normal? Or am I just imagining it? I wasn't looking for anything that day. I was cleaning out the drawer near the kitchen, the one full of old receipts, expired coupons, loose change, and half-dead pens. The kind of drawer every home has. Tucked between some unopened mail and a broken phone charger was a folded envelope with no label. Inside, a printed bank statement I didn't recognize. It wasn't from our usual account. Different bank, different number. But my name was on it, next to Lucas's. And the numbers didn't make sense. Large transfers, several in a row. Thousands gone, sent to another internal account. None of it matched what I'd seen in our shared budget. My stomach sank. I read through the statement twice, then 3 more times. The amounts weren't small, and they weren't recent. This had been going on for months. When Lucas came home, I was waiting. I didn't yell, didn't accuse. I just held the statement out and asked, "What is this?" He glanced at it, barely paused. "Where'd you find that?" "You didn't answer my question." He dropped his bag on the counter. "You're overreacting. So it's real." He walked past me, poured himself a drink like we were discussing grocery lists. "It's a holding account. Temporary. I moved some money to protect it from market instability." "Without telling me?" He looked at me like I was slow. "Maya, I know what I'm doing. You don't need to get involved in the technical side of things." I took a breath. "It's our account. You moved our money." He laughed once, short, humorless. "Our money? Come on. Let's not pretend like you earned any of that. Your dad hands you everything." Something snapped. "You think that gives you the right to steal from me?" His voice rose. "I didn't steal. I managed. Because you don't. You walk around like you know business, but all you've done is play rich girl investor. You wouldn't last a day doing what I do." I stepped back. His face was red now. Voice louder, body tense. "You want to talk about betrayal? How about being married to someone who second-guesses everything you do? You act like I'm the problem, but the truth is you never respected me." I didn't say anything. I didn't cry. I just stood there, watching this version of Lucas unravel in front of me. Every calm mask he'd worn peeled away. The man who used to plan rooftop dinners and hold my hand in galleries was gone. Or maybe he was never there to begin with. Something inside me went still. I waited for him to leave the room, then took the statement, scanned it into my drive, and locked my laptop. That night, I didn't sleep. I made lists instead. Numbers. Names. Places. I counted how many days I'd need to get everything in order. Not because I was afraid. Because I was done. I didn't plan to go to my parents' place. I hadn't been there in weeks, maybe months without realizing. But after the restaurant, after the plate hit me and silence fell like a dropped curtain, I walked out without a bag, without a plan. I took the first car I could find and told the driver an address I hadn't said in too long. By the time I got there, the chocolate had dried across the front of my dress. I still smelled like red wine and cream. I stood at the front door not knowing if I should knock or just collapse. My mother answered. Her face shifted in slow motion, from confusion to concern to something that made my throat burn. She didn't ask a single question. She stepped aside and said, "Come in." I sat on the edge of the couch like I didn't belong there, like I was visiting someone else's house. She brought me a warm cloth and a glass of water. Still no questions. It was my father who finally broke the silence. "Is he still at the restaurant?" I nodded. He stood without a word and left the room. I don't know where he went. I didn't ask. I told them everything. Not just about the cake. About the accounts. The comments. The loneliness. All of it. My mother reached over and held my hand the entire time, like she was anchoring me to something real. Later that night, after I'd changed into one of her soft old sweaters and stopped shaking, my father came back and handed me a card. "Vanessa Price," he said. "She's handled tougher than this." I stared at the name. A lawyer. It felt surreal. "You need someone who knows how this works." The next morning, I made the call. Vanessa was calm and direct. No pity, no gasps, just clear instructions and sharper questions. She asked for timelines, documents, access. I gave her everything. She didn't promise anything she couldn't deliver. She just said, "We'll get through this. Step by step." It was the first time in a long time that I felt like someone was on my side. Chloe came by that evening. She walked in with a bottle of wine and a look that was half anger, half heartbreak. She didn't say, "I told you so." She just hugged me tighter than anyone had in years. "I should have listened sooner," I whispered. "You're here now," she said. "That's what matters." I apologized to both of them, my parents, Chloe, for the distance, for the silence, for pretending everything was okay when it wasn't. They didn't hold it against me. They just stayed close, like they'd never left. I wasn't fine, but I was safe. And for the first time in months, I could breathe. The first time I sat across from Vanessa Price, she didn't waste time with sympathy. She flipped open a leather-bound notebook and got straight to it. What did I know? What could I prove? What was the timeline? Her questions were sharp but not cruel. Precise, like a surgeon cutting through fog. I handed her the bank statements, the screenshots, the emails. Everything I'd collected in silence. Every comment, every shift in access, every unexplained charge. She read without blinking. When she spoke, her voice was calm. "This isn't just messy. It's calculated." She explained the pattern, how Lucas had slowly moved me away from control, how his language could be used to support emotional coercion, how the financial decisions weren't just reckless, they were deliberate. "He counts on you not fighting back," she said. I told her I was done not fighting. We worked quickly. I wrote affidavits, traced transactions, I even found an old email where he bragged to a friend about finally having a seat at the Sinclair table. It didn't say everything, but it said enough. Then he called. His name lit up my screen like a wound reopening. I let it ring the first time, the second. By the third, I picked up. "We need to talk," he said. Not a question, a command. I didn't respond. Just meet me. One conversation. No lawyers. He chose a cafe downtown, one we used to go to before things turned. When I walked in, he was already seated, stirring sugar into black coffee like this was just another morning. "Maya," he said, smiling too wide. "You look good. Strong." I didn't sit. "We don't have to do this like enemies," he said. "We were a team, remember?" I sat slowly. Teams don't lie. His smile faltered. "I was protecting us. You were naive, listening to your dad, your little girl gang." "Stop." He blinked. "This isn't about money," I said. "It's about respect, and you never had any for me." The mask cracked then, just slightly. His eyes narrowed. "You think they'll take your side? The spoiled daughter who never had to earn a thing." I didn't move. "You don't know what I'm capable of," he said, leaning in. "I'll ruin you. Publicly." I stood. "You already tried," I said, voice steady. "You failed." Then I walked out. I didn't look back. Didn't flinch when the door closed behind me. Vanessa was waiting in her car nearby. When I got in, she didn't ask how it went. She just handed me a folder. "He blinked first," she said. "We were ready." It started with whispers. People I hadn't heard from in months suddenly reached out. Old co-workers, distant acquaintances, even someone I barely remembered from college. Their messages came wrapped in concern, but all carried the same question. Is it true? Lucas was speaking loudly and everywhere. He told anyone who would listen that I'd blindsided him, that I was spoiled cold, impossible to please, that I'd abandoned our marriage for attention. He made himself the victim, a loving husband discarded by a rich, ungrateful wife who couldn't handle real life. The story spread fast, faster than I expected. He told people I had mental health issues, that I was erratic, that I used my father's money to control him, then cut him off when he pushed back. None of it was true, but it didn't have to be. Lucas was charming, practiced. He knew how to perform sincerity. I stayed quiet, not because I was afraid, but because I was focused. Vanessa told me every response could be twisted. Every public word could be used against me. So I leaned on the people who already knew the truth. My parents, Chloe, the few friends who never bought Lucas's act to begin with. They didn't ask if I was okay. They asked what I needed. Food. Silence. Distraction. Answers. Whatever it was, they showed up with it. Meanwhile, Vanessa kept digging. Her team requested records, subpoenaed files, went through every financial trail with a fine-tooth comb. At first, all we had were fragments, suspicious movements, vague explanations. But then she found it, an internal document from one of Lucas's past projects, showing he'd redirected client funds into our joint account to cover personal expenses. And worse, emails, messages between him and one of my old mentors, trying to sabotage a speaking engagement I'd booked months before. He'd called me unreliable, said I was burning out, and probably wouldn't follow through. The gig had quietly disappeared from my calendar, and I hadn't thought twice about it at the time. Now, it was clear why. He wasn't just lying. He was undermining me professionally and privately, trying to make the world see me the way he wanted. Unstable, selfish, incapable. When Vanessa handed me the printed pages, I didn't cry. I didn't rage. I sat at her desk, reading every line, feeling something shift inside me. I'd spent so long questioning my own memory, wondering if I'd been unfair, if I'd misunderstood. But here, in black and white, was proof that I hadn't imagined any of it. The control, the lies, the manipulation. It wasn't in my head. It had happened, and now we had evidence. "This changes everything," Vanessa said, her tone calm but firm. "He can't spin this in court." I nodded, fingers resting lightly on the paper. It wasn't just validation, it was power. Not the kind my father had, or the kind Lucas pretended to chase. This was mine, built on truth, on surviving, on not looking away. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't scared of what came next. I was ready. The courtroom smelled like paper and old wood, too clean, too quiet. Lucas sat across the room in a gray suit that looked too polished for the man I now knew. He kept his face calm, but his fingers tapped the table. I didn't look at him, not once. Vanessa stood with a folder in her hands, sharp and composed. She spoke with precision, guiding the judge through our timeline. She laid it out piece by piece, emails, bank statements, witness accounts. She explained how Lucas moved funds without my knowledge, how he slowly cut me off from access, how he used charm to cover control. When Lucas's attorney responded, they flipped the script, painted me as detached, overly ambitious, uninterested in the marriage. They showed photos of us smiling in Paris, emails where I'd said everything's fine. They tried to make those moments mean more than months of harm. Then it was my turn. I stood slowly, palms slightly damp, heart steady. The judge asked if I wanted to speak. I nodded. He didn't hurt me all at once, I said. It wasn't bruises or screaming matches. It was smaller than that. Quiet things, constant things. My voice didn't shake. I made sure it didn't. He made me question what I wore, who I talked to, what I said at work. He laughed when I tried to build something for myself. Told me I was naive, told me I didn't understand real business. And when I disagreed with him, he called me controlling. I paused. The room was still. He threw cake at me, in public, because I didn't pay for his dinner. And the worst part is, I apologized for making him angry. I apologized for his humiliation. I looked at the judge, not at Lucas. That wasn't love. That was control. And I stayed quiet longer than I should have. But not anymore. I know what I deserve. The judge didn't respond right away. Just nodded slightly, eyes unreadable. Later, the ruling came without drama. Clean and clear. I kept my assets. Lucas was ordered to repay every cent he'd moved from our accounts, plus damages. The fraud, the deceit, the emotional harm, it all mattered now. Officially, Lucas didn't look at me as the verdict was read. Not
Thank
once.
you for finishing this
I walked
video.
out of that courtroom.
Don't forget
not
to
with a
subscribe
smile,
so you don't
but
miss
with more
something
real
better.
stories and
Freedom.
inspiring content. If you liked this video, share it with your friends. It might help someone else too. Check out our other videos for more amazing stories. See you soon.